On May 29th, 2026, in a crazy turn of events, Judge Altonaga reinstated the defamation verdict against Milagro Gramz. Now, if you've been following the Megan Thee Stallion defamation trial, you may be thinking, wait, didn't Megan Thee Stallion already win, and wasn't there already a final verdict? Today, I'll be breaking down the federal court order and telling you the story about how Milagro Gramz was just found liable for defamation a second time. Welcome to the channel. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe as we get started. I'm Dr. Q, and this is Real Quick Media. Okay, so let's get started. So the judge starts on page 1 with section 1 background. Under the introduction heading, the court lays out that in October 2024, Megan Pete sued Milagro Cooper for coordinating a social media smear campaign following Tory Lanez's 2022 conviction. Then we hit the procedural background heading. Megan sued for 4 things: defamation, promoting the deepfake video, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and cyberstalking. And the minute this lawsuit landed, Milagro's defense team reached for a very specific statute, Florida Statute 770.01. The law says if you sue a news media defendant in Florida, you have to give them 5 days written notice before you file. Megan's lawyers didn't do that. But in fact, during discovery, Milagro had admitted on her own live streams that she was not a journalist. And initially, Judge Altonaga completely agreed, based on her own live streams admitting so. But if you skip this 5-day notice and it turns out the defendant is media, your defamation claim gets dismissed completely. So Milagro's team tries to set a trap. Under the heading, Evidence Concerning Defendant's Media Status, she formed Mob Radio LLC, she contracted with Station Head, and the Shade Room approached her about joining their team. The statute typically exists to protect newspapers, periodicals, broadcasters, and Milagro's argument was, look at what I built. It's a real business, and look who came calling. But these wouldn't apply to the reason she actually lost her media designation, which we'll get to soon. So at this point, the media defendant status was up in the air. The judge actually elected the jury to make the decision on her media defendant status. So Megan's team objects. They argue this is a legal question, not a factual one, that it's completely out of order, and that putting it out on the form is inviting exactly the type of chaos that eventually unfolds. So the jury goes into deliberations, and they do their job on the things that they were actually equipped to evaluate. They take a look at the threats. They look at the deepfake video Milagro directed her followers to on X. The jury got it. They understood the harm and found her liable for defamation, promotion of a deepfake, and IIED. Cyberstalking was dropped. But then they get to the media status questions. The judge notes that they were so confused, they sent a note asking, if we believe half, is this considered a yes? Half of what? The note itself is a confession. It said, we have no idea what you're asking us to decide. But even though they were confused by the special questions, they ended up labeling Milagro as a media defendant. So this triggered the legal trap. Because Megan's lawyers hadn't given the 5-day pre-suit notice required for journalists under Florida law, the judge's hands were legally tied. The court entered the final judgment for Megan for the deepfake video and IIED, but even though the jury found Milagro liable for defamation, that specific win could not be entered into the final judgment. But this media status question is so major and sounds like it keeps coming up because of what Milagro actually did. Still in the background section, under the heading 3 claimed defamatory statements, the judge lists exactly what Milagro was found liable for. 1. Calling Megan a non-credible witness. 2. Stating she could go down the list of all the different stuff that was not true. 3. Asking, was Megan Thee Stallion caught trying to deceive the courts again? And then the judge outlines the timeline of coordination using her own statements. On September 17, 2020, Tory Lanez, also known as Sonstar Peterson, sends Milagro a DM. I don't know how you're doing your live tonight, but if you gave me that or any exclusive, it changed my life. Days later, Tory's father, Sonstar Peterson, reaches out to talk off the record. Then the money starts moving. The court notes Sonstar Peterson made 5 separate payments to Milagro, totaling $2,500. He texts her asking for materials ASAP for the attorney, and she emails him screenshots of Megan's ex-boyfriend and sends a video of Megan holding a weapon in a pool. And then there's the Zoom meeting. The Friends of Sonstar and Daystar Zoom meeting is one of the most critical pieces of evidence the judge used to prove that Milagro Cooper was acting as a paid operative for the Tory Lanez family. family rather than an independent journalist. Here's exactly what happened during and immediately after that Zoom call. So the Zoom call meeting took place on June 10th, 2023, and was organized by Tory Lanez's father, Sonstar Peterson. And during the call, a participant using the screen name Tory Lanez's source outlined a specific public relations strategy. The user told the group it was important to push the narrative that Tory had never weaponized his fans against Megan. However, the user explicitly stated that they needed a third party to push the information to the public. They explained that the things that he said could be held against him when he put it out, meaning that the narrative had to come from someone other than Tory himself to protect him legally. And Milagro actively participated in this strategy session call. She shared a transcript that highlighted a sentence implying Megan stepped on glass the night of the incident. She then asked the group in the chat, "Are things like this along the lines of what you're looking for?" The court noted that this confirmed her understanding of her role as their third-party operative. The very next day, Milagro and Sonstar Peterson, Tory Lanez's father, were messaging about a failed Zelle payment and agreed to switch the transaction to Cash App. So Judge Altonaga used the transcript of the Zoom call to establish that Milagro was taking direct guidance and money from the Peterson family. Because Milagro's third defamatory statement, asking if Megan was caught trying to deceive the courts again, lined up with the Zoom Friends strategy meeting, the judge ruled that Milagro was definitively commissioned by the family with Cash App. This direct coordination is what ultimately stripped Milagro of her media protections and allowed the judge to reinstate the defamation verdict. According to the courts, she was a paid operative, commissioned, coordinated, and bankrolled by the family of a man who was convicted of the assault against Megan Thee Stallion. But now we move to Section 2, the legal standards, which explains how Megan's team fixed the jury's mistake. So Megan's team files 3 motions, Rules 50, 59, and 60. In Section 3, discussion under A Rule 60B1, the judge actually denies the first 2. Why? Because during the trial, Megan's own lawyers had agreed to let the jury answer the media question. And that goes back to the invited error issue that I discussed in a previous video. You don't get to agree to a procedure and then complain when the result doesn't go your way. That's technically what invited error means. But then we hit the subheading B, Rule 60B6. Plaintiff shows extraordinary circumstances. So this is like the judicial safety net. The judge reminds everyone that she had promised the lawyers on the record that they could revisit the media status question post-verdict. And under the final heading, defendant was not entitled to pre-suit notice, the judge breaks down the legal doctrine. Florida Statute 770.01 says that if you editorialize while being commissioned by a client, you lose your media protection. You can't take money to push an agenda and then claim the First Amendment. But the judge went further than the Zoom call meeting. The judge literally date matched the Peterson family's text messages to Milagro and her public statements and appearances on DJ Akademiks' platform. Okay, so back on December 21st, 2022, we're right in the middle of Tory Lanez's trial. Tory texts Milagro directly, "It's Tory, hit me." That exact same day, Milagro posts the first defamatory statement, publicly calling Megan a non-credible witness. 2 days later, on December 23rd, the jury hands down a guilty verdict against Tory. Fast forward to January 5th, 2023, Sonstar Peterson texts Milagro, "Hi, call me ASAP." Well, that exact same day, the very day Tory's dad tells her to call him ASAP, where does Milagro go? She goes straight onto DJ Akademiks' podcast. And why does that matter? Well, DJ Akademiks was very vocal during the trial and often spoke publicly against Megan Thee Stallion. So the court saw it as her taking this coordinated PR campaign to one of the biggest platforms covering the trial, someone who's considered himself a friend, and she drops the second defamatory statement. She sits on Akademiks' platform and tells the audience, I could go down the list of all the different stuff that wasn't true, that I've been saying. That's not true, that's not true. And so the judge doesn't just bring up DJ Akademiks for context. She officially documents his podcast as the vehicle for the smear campaign for the second defamatory statement. So the court saw it as Tory's dad gave the order, and hours later, Milagro was executing it on Akademiks' platform. And that's why the judge saw her as being commissioned by a client, which is why she lost her media shield. This is one of the biggest takeaways from the judgment for YouTubers going forward, especially those with large platforms and personal ties that operate in the manner described in the judgment filing. And that brings us to Section 4, Conclusion. The judge writes, in sum, because the trial record shows that defendant was commissioned by the Petersons to publish or broadcast the 3 defamatory statements, the jury's verdict as to count 1 is reinstated, totaling back to the $75K. So Megan Thee Stallion just got a federal court to say, on the record and under seal, that what happened to her was not just internet drama. It was legally actionable harm, orchestrated, paid for, and now Milagro Gramz is being held accountable for participating as a paid operative against Megan Thee Stallion in a smear campaign. Megan released a statement following the reinstated verdict. I'm truly grateful for the judge's thoughtful and thorough consideration in reinstating the jury's defamation verdict and holding the defendant fully accountable for all of her actions. I'm ready to finally close this chapter, and I hope this sends a powerful message that spreading lies and defamatory statements has clear consequences. So if you run a gossip blog, a YouTube channel, or a podcast network, this ruling is a massive wake-up call. The court made it clear that simply forming an LLC, trademarking your brand, or having a big platform or station head X or YouTube doesn't give you the blanket license to try and target someone and destroy their life with your content. You can't consider yourself a journalist and then use your platform to spread deepfake videos or jump on a live stream to ask if a victim is legally, mentally incapacitated or an alcoholic, or threaten to run them over with the car. This ruling draws a hard legal line on online harassment and defamatory statements attacking someone's mental state or credibility. It says that this isn't just stan culture or messy online beef, it's legally actionable harm. And what does this mean for independent journalists? Honestly, it protects them when they do practice ethics. Judge Altonaga was very careful in this order. She explicitly noted that having a bias or a particular agenda does not automatically rob a speaker of their media protections. Real journalists are allowed to editorialize. They're allowed to have opinions. But what they can't do is act as a paid operative. The judge cited case law stating that the media shield only applies if you editorialize without being commissioned to do so by your client. So you can't take secret cash payment, sit in strategy Zoom calls with the defendant's family, coordinate your posts to match their text messages, and then state you have First Amendment protections when you get caught. And that concludes the Megan Thee Stallion versus Milagro Gramz defamation case. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me how you think this is going to change the way blogs and content creators operate moving forward. I'm Dr. Q. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the gems I drop in the next video. Thanks for watching.